Today's video will be about coffee roasting, the easy way. I'm doing it for espresso, so this guide will be for espresso. First thing, you need to have green beans. You can buy them from your local store. And and you can just choose whatever coffee bean you like and roast it. But this time around I have this, this is not an espresso blend. Espresso blend essentially just means a blend of different beans in order for your espresso to taste more sweet, less bitter, more acidic. So it's composed of more beans in order to give a characteristic flavor. But this is not a blend. This is just a single kind of bean, single origin. So when you roast beans, make sure to have a baking sheet and weigh out your amount of coffee beans. Start out with a small batch, for instance 200 grams, and roast it and see how long it takes, and keep that receipt if you like it. And if you don't like it, for instance if it's too acidic, then you need to roast more, and if it's too bitter, you need to roast less. Darker beans give more bitter flavor, and lighter roasted beans give more acidic flavor. Not to mistake it for sourness, because sourness has something to do with low extraction rate, extraction, because of bad distribution or low temperature, etc. The thing with these beans is that it's SHB, which means super hard beans. So this is a bean that needs a high temperature in order for it to be roasted. So instead of using 225 or 230 degrees Celsius, I need to have a higher temperature at about 235 degrees Celsius. And this is because when you have a hard bean, a hard bean is essentially more dense, and because of this, it needs to be roasted with a higher temperature. And this denseness comes from high altitude. It's grown in a high altitude where it's cold, and because it's cold, the bean will grow more slowly but also have more complex flavor. So it's a trade-off. Less dense beans have more air pockets in them, so they don't have to be roasted with such high temperature. But yeah, just weigh out your beans. And yeah, I forgot to mention that less dense beans have more air pockets in them, and this air pocket works like an insulator. So if you roast with too high temperature, your beans will just be burned on the outside and not be cooked, be baked in the inside. So what you need to do with the less dense beans is to cook them at a lower temperature, so that the hot air will get into the bean. Whereas these hard beans with really dense structure, they are how can I say it? They are transferring heat from the outsides to the core much easier. And in order for them to pop, you need to have high temperature. But coffee beans have two pops, just like popcorns. They have two. Not that popcorns have two, but yeah, you get what I mean. In order to have a coffee bean made for espresso, and espresso beans are not a type of bean, it's just a roast. It's a roast degree, and espresso beans usually are more darker roasted in order for them to get good flavor. But I have measured out my beans. As said, start with a small batch, 200 grams. Distribute them evenly, and they are going into the oven. Make sure to use a timer. We are going to bake them in about 15 minutes or so. Have some good ventilation, because it will smoke a little or a lot, depending on how much we roast them. So yeah, I'm just going to do it. Wait, I'll just turn this on, and I'm putting them in. Make sure to not use convection, because coffee beans will produce when they are roasted, they will produce an outer layer which is extremely light, and unfortunately with the fan speed from inside, it will blow all over the oven and cause some problems with your oven, or they can even burn. So it's not good to use convection, but instead use heat source that is just from above and below. And I have started my timer, and I will give them about 15 minutes. So 7 minutes have passed, and I have the first pop, because I can hear it. Yeah, that was one pop. 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have gone past the yellowing, and the browning is going to start now. As you can see, it's more brown, and also the first pop will be audible. Now I'm just waiting for the second pop, and I will roast in the middle of the second pop. And depending on how much I will roast, it will either be a medium or dark roast. But I tend to roast them more on the dark side, because I like the sweeter and more bitter chocolate flavor of the coffee bean. And now we are starting our espresso roast, because we are in the second pop, as you can hear. Should be audible. I've used approximately 12 minutes now. As you can see, the coffee beans are popping, and I'm roasting this a little bit more, because I want more color on the coffee beans. As in right now, the coffee beans are medium roasted, but I want them to be dark roasted. Typically, this is what you will get in a coffee shop. This is the kind of roast degree. And actually, I don't like the degree of roasting you get from a coffee shop. So that's also why I like to roast them myself. so I can get that profile I like. But actually, I would say this is about it. And I have used 13 minutes, and one should always aim to get about 15 minutes. 5 minutes plus minus doesn't matter, but approximately 15 minutes, that's a good roast. So yeah, I'm just turning off the oven, and I'm taking them outside and cool down outside. So as you can see now, I'm outside, and I have transferred all my coffee beans in some kind of colander, and that is to get rid of all these flakes. As you can see, these are not doing anything good or bad for my espresso grind, but I'll get rid of them because they're just a mess. So yeah, so I'll just swirl around, and you can see they're going off. I can also just blow on them, but yeah. And this should be done until there are no more flakes. I have now removed all my all my flakes from the coffee, and that took me 1 minute. Also, one thing to mention is that the other reason you want to take them outside and stir them around is to cool them down. If you don't cool them down, they will just essentially continue to cook on the inside because they are still hot. Also, just take a second and just admire how evenly colored and roasted these beans are when you do it in the oven. This took me only 15 minutes, and it's so easy to do. And you decide which roast profile you like, and that's why I highly recommend to weigh out your beans to make, for instance, 200 grams every time. Use the same temperature every time. Put them in the same rack position every time, and just time it out, and make sure that you roast them the same amount of time each time if you like the roast degree. And just to recap, if you want consistent roasting with coffee beans every time, you need to weigh out your beans. Make sure to preheat your oven. Make sure to preheat it between 225 degrees Celsius and 230 degrees Celsius. Make sure to use the same rack position, and make sure to use the same amount of time every time, and that should be about 15 minutes plus minus 5 minutes. If you think that your beans could use more darkness, more roast, just let them be in the oven for another 1 or 2 minutes, and that should do it. It's yeah, but yeah. Another thing is to store these in an airtight container, like this, with a rubber seal, and in this way they will not lose aroma or get any excess moisture or air and degrade. So yeah, now I have sealed them off, and one thing to mention is these beans will let out excess CO2, so every time you open this container it will just puff because there's overpressure of CO2 in here, and that's totally normal and harmless. But one thing to mention is that this CO2, if you don't let them rest for 3 or 4 days, will make your espresso more acidic, because CO2 will will make things more acidic. But let them rest 3 or 4 days and just use them. You can also use them right away, but flavor wise, it's not developed and will just taste kind of flat. And also dialing in fresh coffee beans essentially is impossible, because they are just producing too much crema, and if that's what you like, then do it, but it's not fun. They are producing too much crema, and and the coffee will not taste good either. I like to rest them for 1 week, and after 1 week or 2 weeks, their flavor will just be amazing. That's also why I like to roast 2 jars. So I have 1 jar that I use and 1 jar that is resting. So when I finish up this one, I can continue with this one, and it's fresh and it has rested. If you like this video, please give it a like, and if I could improve myself, just write it down in the comment section, or if you have questions, just write them down and I'll answer them. But that's it for today. See you again.